back to my channel. So today's video is a super exciting one. You guys have been waiting for it. I've been excited to make it, and it's the part 2 of making my own perfume experience. You guys know, or if you don't, I will link the video, but I did a part 1 kind of taking you through the entire experience when I was on holiday in St. Martin at Dijon, and I made it like a guess me surprise thing for the giveaway, which is now completed. Obviously the winner was selected or chosen in a way because it was randomized, and it was because I really was curious to see who would come closest, considering the fact that I gave the clue that the fragrance that I created doesn't have like the typical me notes, and that I ended up surprising myself. I looked at all your answers and I was really intrigued. A lot of you had 1 note out of 5 correct, which, considering how many notes there are ever, I thought that was pretty good. And then one of you got 2 notes correct, and that was the winner. So we are going to get into not only the full 5 notes and scent breakdown and everything of Saint Secret, which is my fragrance that I created, but also I do have the note breakdown of the other 2 scents, because if you haven't checked out that first video, definitely go check it out. But I did mention that you create 3 in like a small batch, and then you choose your favorite to bottle up and name and everything. So we're obviously going to start with the one I chose as my favorite, and the one that I have here. It had 5 notes. Some you will see the other 2 have a little bit more, but essentially you picked a base that was pre-made from all of their bases, and that had a varying amount of notes depending, and then you picked your own top, heart, and base note on top. So we will get into it. I'm going to actually put this one on because I don't have a scent of the day yet. I love it. I'm still obsessed with it, which is great news, obviously. And we are going to break it down. So the base notes that were pre-made that I picked actually were frankincense and myrrh. And I do have my little booklet here so that I don't give you any mistakes. Yes, they were frankincense and myrrh. I know my notes by heart, but the other ones I obviously don't for the other 2 fragrances. And I was really surprised because it's not that those are notes that I don't like, that I hate, but frankincense in particular, I don't even know if I have very many fragrances with that note ever. I know I have some, but it's not a note that's very prominent. And myrrh, I have it in a couple of my fragrances that I really do like. But you guys, I mean, the ones who were guessing like more typical notes, you know me, you would have thought something else, and I would have agreed with you. But this base on its own, and I remember smelling it, was so like warm and ambery and inviting and just intoxicating is the best way to put it. And I knew I just had to go for it. So I decided, and I think this might be helpful for you guys to know, that I decided I was going to make 3 very different types of fragrances, and make them like the 3 types I most likely gravitate to in my personal life, and then see which one of those perform the best on my skin. So the first one, the one I created, was that kind of warm, ambery vibe, almost like a little bit medicinal, sort of fragrance that I like. The second one that we'll get into it was the more kind of beachy floral. And then the third one was I don't even know how to put it, like the fruitier one, I suppose, but you'll see. So once I decided that that was going to be my first base, I knew that I had to kind of tailor make the top, heart, and base notes to complement frankincense and myrrh, but still choose things that I personally liked as well, and not just make them so suited to the base that I didn't like them, or that it was going to be too spicy or peppery or something like that. So I looked at the entire piano like list of notes. There were so many, like I mentioned before, and The note that I think a lot of you guessed correctly, and you guessed different versions because there were a million and, I mean, not a million, but there were a whole lot of different types of musk notes. And I smelled all of them. There was like black musk, white musk, like a clean musk, just regular original musk. Anyways, there were a whole bunch, and in the end, the one I liked the most, as plain as it is, but I mean, that was really how I was feeling, was the original musk note. So I did smell all of them, or all of them that I could find, because like I said, there was a lot. And my top note that I added was musk. Just their plain Dijon musk I thought was really nice. I can certainly smell it. It's a very neutral musk, and I think that's what I liked most about it. It wasn't too clean laundry-like, but it wasn't animalic at all, and it kind of rested in this like beautiful neutral place that added powderiness with a touch of, I would say, clean over animalic, because I'm not an animalic person, but in general it was like the most neutral and all-encompassing musk, probably because it was like just the original or the generic one. But yeah, that's the one I liked the most, and so that is the top note I added. All right, so then we moved along to what I was going to choose for the heart note. And what I will say is they're like pre-made mixes that I mentioned. Depending on the one you chose, they might just have base notes. They might have top, middle, and base notes. They might have middle and base. And so that also would come into play when I was creating it. I probably took this process a little bit more seriously than every guest that goes into there, but you guys know me, and obviously I was going to. So the one that I selected for Cinq Secrets were just base notes. Frankincense and myrrh were just the base notes. So I was also really cognizant of making sure that I was choosing top, middle, and base notes that were really complementary, considering that I didn't have any top or middle within my pre-mixed base. So my top was musk, like I mentioned. The heart note that I chose, and a couple of you guessed this one as well, was heliotrope. That was probably the most me note, but heliotrope can go in a variety of different ways, as could musk. They only had one heliotrope note as far as I can remember, and I really liked it. I felt like it added a, again, a powderiness and a muskiness to it, but a little bit more of a, I think it's like contributing to the medicinal vibe, and it really complemented, because I would smell, before mixing it, I would kind of smell alongside the base, and I felt like their heliotrope really, really complemented the frankincense and myrrh, which were already warm and ambery, and it just blended beautifully together before I'd even blended them. So I was like, okay, that's a match for sure. The musk is there in the opening, but this is just complementing so well with the base that I already love. And so I picked heliotrope, and then the base note that I picked to add to the base notes was cashmere woods. And I don't think any of you picked that note in particular, but it's very specific, and so I would have been blown out of the water, like mind blown, if you guys had guessed that. So fair enough that I don't think anyone did, at least the last time I checked. But cashmere, they had a million and one woodsy notes, and cashmere woods, again, really, really complemented all of the previous notes that I'd picked. I'd had it on the side because I had a couple of choices that I was trying to decide between, and moving them and feeling like, okay, that's more of a, you know, version 2 fragrance, or that's a version 3, or I know I want this, but maybe not. I didn't want anything that would make this bitter, or too earthy and green. And so I knew I definitely didn't want it to go in that direction. And so the woodiness that the cashmere woods adds to this is quite soft. And again, it's very warm, and it's, I think, the most understated note of all 5. And I think it just kind of grounds it to a certain extent. in the most beautiful way without being overwhelming. I definitely didn't want the woodsy or woodiness of it to be very, very overwhelming. And the kind of descriptor for the base that I chose was like an earthy, smoky, a fresh, earthy, and smoky base. And I would say that I kind of disagree with the earthy vibe to it, because trying to give you guys an idea of what this smells like, there's a real bright kind of warmth to this that's super powdery, obviously, but has kind of like a resinous or medicinal or what have you, or, you know, the heliotrope vibe to it that doesn't venture into being almondy, unfortunately, because their heliotrope wasn't very almondy, but it definitely lives inside that realm, and it isn't in any way green or earthy to my nose, or really in reality. So I did want to break that down, because sometimes you just need to mix your own fragrance notes and figure out how they smell on you and how the accords are working, rather than relying on kind of descriptors that are there to guide you if you feel confident in what it smells like. So that was the mix that I did for Cinq Secrets. I love it. I still wear it all the time. It has not kind of rubbed me the wrong way, which I was sort of worried during the process, just because you're smelling, and I'm obviously used to this, doing so many videos and having fragrances be such a huge part of my life, my entire life, but it is very different just being there in the moment and being on some, I mean, not like a huge time crunch, but just being there like on a schedule and trying to follow steps and not being able to smell each and every note, obviously. Like, if I had it my way, I'd be there for a full day and smell everything and take my time. So I did worry that just because it was, you know, like an hour or two, it wasn't enough for the perfectionist in me to pick like my perfect ideal, and that I'd get sick of my scent. Happy to report that doesn't happen, and that I'm just that level of crazy that I could have stayed there forever. But anyways, that was the scent I created. Now let's get to the two that I have created and then chose to put aside and pick my fave. All right, so the second scent I created, and I just took a look actually at these like notes that I have in the booklet and everything. I realized totally by accident that when I was creating, or when I was picking my 3 bases, the pre-mixed bases, I picked one which was all base notes, which was in this one. My second fragrance had middle and base, and my third one had top, middle, and base. So I got a good, without realizing, like a really good view of what it's like to pick more convoluted and complex bases, or, you know, pre-mixes, the middle of the ground one, and then the more pure kind of singular base. So I can kind of give my experience on all 3 as well. So the second scent or beaker that I created was that coconut, or beachy floral, I should say. I knew one of my fragrances had to be a floral because I love florals, and the ones I enjoy the most are definitely sort of white florals and beachy florals and fresher florals that fall into that category, more or less. And so I wanted to pick a base that was soft and really rooted in white florals and rose. And so I did pick one that's described as being a soft floral base. And it has jasmine and rose as the middle notes and sandalwood in its base. So I think that's very typical of me. I think from now onwards, you're going to see notes that you recognize or associate with me a lot more. And it's funny just how things work out when you're actually creating them and what you end up liking more. But I really did like this base. The rose in this base in particular, I remember had a very rose water-esque vibe. It was very rose water, and so I really like that. I know that's not for everyone. Having said that, I was really into it, but it was interesting when I started adding more notes, because I shall explain. My top note that I picked was something called Aqua Spa, which was not really aquatic at all in like a murky way. Obviously I wouldn't have picked it, but it was very kind of clean, fresh, best smelling product, like skincare products at a spa kind of vibe. And I totally fell for that one when I was drawn to smelling it, afraid that it would be aquatic, and it wasn't at all. It was really, really, really beautiful. I wish I could have made like mini bottles of my second and third fragrance. I really wish that could have been a possibility, but even just to describe for you guys, or at least have like little samples of those notes that I picked. But anyways, I remember Aqua Spa being really stunning and really spa-esque. So I loved that one. Then in the heart note that I picked coconut. And I think that was really, again, a very obvious note. And I knew I wanted to pick a very distinctly beachy note. And so I smelled all the coconuts. They had a couple coconutty scents, and they had a couple like coconut adjacent scents and beachy notes in general. And again, just like the musk, I ended up going for generic coconut. I felt like it was the freshest. I felt like it was the most pure. And everything else I think deterred a little bit from coconut, obviously, because it was coconut something or coconut sugar. And I just wanted the most, not even generic, but just the most run-of-the-mill coconut to beach up the fragrance. So I went there. And then the base that I added to it was called Rose Musk. And obviously it went well with the rose note that was already in the heart, in the pre-mixed heart. But I felt like Rose Musk was directly picked by me to kind of combat, maybe that's the wrong word to use, but just kind of add to that rose that was in the premix, because the rose in the premix was very rose watery, like I mentioned, and I really did like it to begin with. But as I started mixing in my own top and heart notes, I noticed how prominent that rose water note was in the premix. So much so that I felt like it not only overpowered the jasmine and sandalwood that was in that mix, but it wasn't really, it was still shining through even with the Aqua Spa and the coconut. And so I wanted, the best thing I could think of is to pick kind of a rosy, like a musky rose that would go well with that. And the rose musk was exactly what I needed and what I wanted. And it was just this like perfect mix. So in the end, you did get something that was very floral and soft and fresh. But the reason I think I ended up not picking it eventually is once I tried it on my skin, there were two things that were really distinctly coming up. A, the rose water was still prominent above all else. And while I love that note, I do have fragrances that have that. And I just didn't want the one that I created by myself to be so rose water focused. And second, this was the most safe and generic scent I created out of all three. I felt like this was one that I'd smelled before, and it was just, I couldn't put my name to, or my mind to like name a particular fragrance it was reminding me of, but I felt like I'd like layered scents that reminded me of this, and I really wanted something that was as most unique as possible to me, so I decided not to go for the second one. So now we get to the third creation, and the third beaker creation was my second choice. It was the one that I was really deciding between what I eventually chose and this one. So pretty early on, once I had tried all three, and I think I mentioned this in my first video, but pretty early on, once I tried all three, I'd eliminated number 2, the one I just mentioned, because of all of those reasons that I got into. And so it really was between the one I picked and this one. And this one had the most complex premix. It had the one that was described as a sweet feminine blend. So it had top, middle, and base notes already in that premix. And those were, the top notes were pineapple, lemon, and anise. The middle notes were violet and rose. and the base notes were vanilla, musk, and tonka. So I think this fragrance was the most quintessentially me, and it's the one that you guys definitely, especially if you weren't gonna guess like out of the box, like I mentioned, if you were guessing me notes, which totally fair for you to do, then you probably guessed a lot of the ones I just mentioned already in the premix. So it's not surprising at all that I would have picked this one. And I was picking my premixes blind at first. That was just something I wanted to do. I didn't want to be aware of the notes in the premix before I picked them. And so I didn't look at the notes while I was smelling them, and I only figured it out after. And I think it's very telling that I ended up liking this one. There were very, very many premixes, so it's not like there was like 2 or 4 that I was trying to pick between. There were a lot, and I loved this one. So once I picked this one, I knew that this one was going to be my kind of like explosion of every dream note I ever had. And the base already had a lot of my dream notes, and I was really excited that I ended up actually picking a premix, that had violet in it, because they had run out. They no longer had a violet note like as itself. I know they've had it in the past. They've obviously have it in the past because it's in their premixes, but their piano of notes and their organ of notes, I should say, like changes depending on what they have in stock then. And so I mentioned in the first video they didn't have violet, but I did have violet in one of my fragrances because it was in the premix. And so I added in its top note, I actually added a sandalwood vanilla. I was surprised, not that I don't like sandalwood or vanilla, but I love sandalwood, but I was really surprised that I ended up going for this out of everything, but I kept coming back to this one. Like, I had a lot of notes for this particular third fragrance. I had pulled so many notes, and I was smelling back and forth with the base and everything, and the sandalwood vanilla I thought was giving just the most effortless kind of sweet woodiness or sandal woodiness, I should say, because it wasn't really woody, but it was just giving it that kind of perfect, soft sweetness that I thought, even though there obviously was vanilla and tonka in its base, it was just too undeniably beautiful of a mix that I ended up going for it. I knew that there were other notes that in theory would have been more interesting, but that wouldn't have been as complimentary. So I went with sandalwood vanilla. This is one of those situations where if I had the full day and I'd smelled every single one of the hundreds of notes, maybe there would have been something better. But from all of the things that I pulled, and I pulled a whole lot for this last one, this was the most complimentary, and I felt like it didn't smell like the same vanilla, the original vanilla that was in the premix, and it was just really complimentary to it. So I loved that. The other 2 notes I knew I wanted, and I'd already paired together. So the sandalwood vanilla was actually the last note that I added, and that's also why I picked it, is because I was smelling this creation with the other 2 notes, the middle and heart that I picked with the premix. I was smelling it and I'm like, something is missing. What could be the missing puzzle piece? And that was sandalwood vanilla, because the heart note was, drumroll please, grape. I about lost my mind when I saw they had a grape note, and I lost my mind a second time when I loved the grapiness of it. It was just so beautiful, very full-on grape, and very like grape, popsicle grape, freezy type note. It was a little cool, just the way I like it, and I knew it had to be a part of it. I thought it was complimentary. I think I may have added just a little bit more than the recommended amount with the grape as well, because I was like, this is everything. I'm loving it. And so I loved that, and that was definitely a prominent part in this fragrance. And then the base note, or the third note that I picked to add into this, again, very unsurprising, was banana. I think there was more than one banana note available, or maybe I'm misremembering with coconut, because there were so many coconut notes. But anyways, I again picked the just banana note. I loved it. I thought it was, again, very like candy banana scented. I thought it really complemented the grape for sure, because I was smelling them next to one another and thinking, am I just picking my two favorite fruit notes and forcing this to happen? But no, I wasn't. I loved it. It was perfection, and I thought it really mixed really well with the base as well. In the end, what were the two things that stood out to me for this one when I was testing it? The first one was more of just like a personal where I live in Canada compared to St. Martin comparison. And that scent, even though the second one was supposed to be the beachy floral, the third one ended up being very tropical-esque and very summer fragrance scented, which I love, and those are definitely my favorite, but I felt like I could get away with it in spring, like warm spring days, and then summer, and that's it. It would be the kind of scent where I would wear in the fall and winter to just reminisce, I suppose, on summertime, but it wasn't even that it was like beachy and it could help me reminisce. It was just very suited to hot weather. And so this, Cinq Secrets, I think is very much more suited towards colder weather. Again, I could maybe get away with it on colder spring days, but which is a lot of spring in Canada. So it would be like all of winter, all of fall, and then most of spring. And maybe on high heat, this wouldn't be the best, but I wore it in St. Martin and I loved it there too. It's not like it's going to cut through heat because it does have a lot of frankincense, myrrh, and muskiness, but there is a beauty to it even in high heat. So it was just way more approachable and accessible for me in the climate I live in. And so that's just like a personal decision on why I didn't pick part 3. The second point, which I think is the thing that tipped me over the edge for sure, is I found it the most loud, like, and not necessarily in the best way. And I think in part it had to do with the premix having top, middle, and base notes. It was just already such a full scent in and of itself that I think it was also the most busy and the most sweet and out there and loud, like I said. And I did love that about it. I mean, I made it and I created it and everything, but it was also the one where I was like, is this gonna really rub me the wrong way in a month or two when I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? So in the end, I of course went with my number 1 creation, Cinq Secrets. I've loved it ever since. I hope this was a fun video for you guys to go through all 3 of them and to kind of see where your guesses laid in between all of the notes I picked. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Definitely check the description box below for all the links you need and more. Subscribe here, follow me on Instagram, leave me a comment letting me know what kind of videos you want to see from me, and I'll see you next time. Bye!